Did you know that Benane Head Cave, located on Scotland's Galloway coastline near Edinburgh, is one of the country's most famous tourist attractions? Every year, countless visitors from around the world brave its narrow, damp interior, drawn by the dark legend that surrounds it. It's infamous for the chilling tale of Scotland's most legendary family of murderers, the Sawney Bean clan. In the 16th century, a man named Alexander Bean was born into a poor family in East Lothian, Scotland. His family worked as ditch diggers and fence builders, but young Alexander, soon to be nicknamed Sawney, after the Scots word for a countryman, had darker inclinations. From an early age, he showed disturbing signs of psychopathic tendencies, reveling in blood and violence. The simple, honest work of his family was far from enough to satisfy his twisted desires. Eventually, as he grew older, Sawney rejected his family's trade and abandoned his home, setting off on a path that would lead him to infamy. As Sawney wandered from village to village, indulging in his violent urges, he met a woman who would become his equally sinister partner, Agnes Douglas, a witch who had been cast out from her community. The two outcasts quickly bonded over their shared malevolence, and before long they married and became a terrifying duo. But even their choice of a home was far from ordinary. They settled in Benane Head Cave, near the village of Girvan, a cave stretching over a mile deep with a labyrinth of small chambers. Perched on a seaside cliff, the cave's entrance was submerged by the tide every other day, making it the perfect hideout for the murderous couple. Using Benane Cave as their base, Sawney and Agnes embarked on a new and gruesome profession: robbery and murder. Their primary targets were travelers passing through the coastal villages of Ballantrae and Girvan. At first, they simply robbed and killed their victims, storing the bodies deep within the cave. But if they tried to sell the loot from their robberies in the remote Scottish coastal areas, word would quickly spread throughout the village. Soon, they found themselves with piles of loot, but no food to survive on, pushing them to a horrifying decision. Desperate to survive, the Beans abandoned the last remnants of their humanity. They decided to consume the flesh of their victims, turning to cannibalism as a means of sustenance. They butchered their victims, preserving the limbs in salt and storing them in the cave. This horrific practice continued for 25 years, during which the Bean couple lived comfortably in their secluded cave, eventually having 14 children. These children, raised on the flesh of murdered travelers, naturally took up the family business, growing up to assist their parents in their crimes. As the years passed, the Bean clan expanded, with the children forming incestuous relationships and producing 16 more offspring, making the family a formidable force of 48 members. With each new addition to the family, the number of their victims only grew. By now, the Beans had become masters of their dark craft. How did the Sawney Bean clan manage to carry out perfect murders for over 20 years? As they honed their gruesome craft, they transformed from a mere family of killers into a well-organized militaristic force. No victim was ever left alive, and every trace of their hunts was meticulously erased. As their efficiency increased, so did their stockpile of food. Eventually, the Bean family accumulated more food than they could consume, leading to mold and rotting flesh spilling out of their cave. The coastal villages of Ballantrae and Girvan soon began finding dismembered bodies washed ashore, which the villagers mistakenly attributed to wild animal attacks. No one could have imagined that a family of cannibals was lurking in a cave along the cliffs. One fateful night, the Sawney Bean clan targeted a couple returning home from the market. Husband was armed with a sword and pistol for protection. Though he fought back fiercely, the Bean clan managed to kill his wife in a brutal attack. The hollow, emotionless eyes of the Beans were more like those of beasts than humans. Just as they were about to finish him off, the sound of voices echoed through the night. It was a group of over 20 merchants returning from the neighboring village with armed guards and wagons. The sight they stumbled upon was horrifying, dozens of blood-covered savages attacking a lone man. As the merchants approached, the Beans fled into the darkness, leaving behind the gruesome remains of the wife's body. This incident marked the Bean clan's first failed hunt. But that single mistake would expose the demons that had preyed on Scotland for 25 years. The local lord was outraged by the crimes committed by this monstrous family. A massive force of 400 soldiers, accompanied by bloodhounds, was assembled to track down the Beans. Despite searching the coast for days, they couldn't find any trace of the family, as the well-hidden Benane cave was submerged by high tide and nearly impossible to locate. But during low tide, the relentless search finally paid off when the hounds caught the scent of blood from the cliffside. What they found inside was beyond anything they could have imagined. The stench of blood filled the air, numbing the senses. The walls of the cave were lined with the butchered remains of their victims, hung up to drain the blood. Piles of stolen gold and valuables reached up to the ceiling, and the chambers of the cave were filled with salted body parts. The sight of the children gnawing on human flesh was so grotesque that it was almost impossible to believe they were human at all. The Benane Cave, which had been a breeding ground for horror for 25 years, was nothing less than a living nightmare, a hell on earth brought to life. What was the ultimate fate of the sawneybean clan? Soldiers, overcome with disgust, they detonated explosives at the cave entrance, burying the entire Bean family alive. This is said to be the reason why Benane Cave is now so narrow and difficult to access. Another account suggests that the entire Bean family was captured and taken in chains to the Tolbooth prison in Edinburgh. The crimes they committed were so far beyond the bounds of human decency that the judge didn't even bother with a proper trial. He sentenced them all to death on the spot. Sawneybean and his male descendants were executed in the same brutal manner they had inflicted upon their victims, by having their hands and feet severed and left to bleed to death. Agnes and female descendants were forced to watch before being burned at the stake. The court believed that having been raised on human flesh, even the babies were beyond redemption. It is said that the family showed no fear or remorse as they were put to death, as if they accepted their fate as just another step in the cycle of the predator and prey. To them, it was only natural that the weak should fall to the strong, even when they themselves became the prey. And so, the 25-year reign of terror by the Sawneybean clan came to a gruesome end. It is said that the number of their victims were 5,593. But the story doesn't end there. In the village of Girvan, another legend persists, a tale of one of Sawneybean's daughter who couldn't bear the cruelty of her family, fled to the village. She is said to have settled there, planted a tree, and tried to live a normal life. However, when the truth about her origins was discovered during the execution of the Bean family, the enraged villagers hanged her from the very tree she had planted. To this day, that tree is known as the Hanging Tree in Girvan. Is the story of Sawneybean and his family true? In 2005, Sean Thomas, a journalist for Scotland's national newspaper, The Scotsman, published an article titled "In Search of Sawneybean." According to his research, the tale of Sawneybean may have its roots in an older Scottish legend of cannibalism from the early 15th century, known as the story of Christy Cleek. Furthermore, the tale appears to be intertwined with another historical event, the infamous case of serial cannibalism in 1459. This incident was recorded by historian Nathaniel Crouch, who published it under the pseudonym Richard Burton in his 1813 book, The History of the Kingdom of Scotland. The story goes that a thief, along with his wife and children, lived secretly in a cave where they were eventually burned alive. They had developed a habit of killing and eating young travelers. One of their daughters, who was only a year old at the time, was adopted by a local family in Dundee. However, when she turned 12, she too succumbed to the urge to eat human flesh, leading to her execution. As she faced her death, she is said to have addressed the crowd, saying,
"You condemn me for committing an abhorrent act against human nature? I tell you, if you ever knew the taste of human flesh, you would not be able to resist it."
That she met her death without repentance. Mainstream historians believe that the story of Sawneybean is a composite of various cannibalistic legends passed down through the centuries. However, this only makes it harder to dismiss the tale as mere folklore. For centuries, stories of cannibalistic serial killers have been passed down in Scotland from the 15th to the 19th century. Could the horrifying story of the Sawneybean clan be a fabrication born from these tales? Or is it a reflection of a dark and hidden chapter of history that once existed? This was Mystic Shadow,